Hey, what's up YouTube? This is tcgsam here, and in today's video I'm going to be going over what I think are going to be the best decks for the upcoming YCS Montreal event. This is going to be a little different than my best decks tier list, so if you want to see how some of the less popular decks fare in the metagame, then I highly recommend checking that out, because I'm not going to be talking about those decks here. I'll be focusing more on like the most represented decks. Very quickly going over the tiers. The can win tier, pretty self-explanatory. I think that these are the strongest decks that have the best chance of winning the event. Strong pick, I would say that these decks are pretty solid, maybe have like one or two flaws, but I wouldn't be surprised if they end up doing well. Dark horse, I would say that these decks are not necessarily bad by any means, but it may take something like a really strong pilot or a pilot to have a really good day in order for this deck to do well. And side events, these are decks that I personally wouldn't use in the main event because I don't think they're as strong as some of the other decks. So without any further ado, let's start off with the ROLAD builds. I think that there are three main ones that I've seen do well recently, that being like Azamina ROLAD, the branded version of ROLAD, and then more like of a pure ROLAD, which I think is less popular, but I still wanted to talk about. Starting off with Azamina ROLAD, I think this is probably the most popular way to play it. This is the deck with cards like Diabellstar, Dark Magician of Chaos, Magician Souls. Generally, from what I've seen, this deck is doing like the Protect Code combo, where they summon a bunch of bodies onto the board, make Protect Code, go into Firewall. That combo is pretty much able to do like anything. This deck could, in theory, dump like a Floodgate monster like Christie or Spellcancel, bring it back with a card like the Charmer Links as well. So because this deck generates so many bodies, it is able to do quite a wide variety of things. But for the purpose of this video, I think that no matter what version of like Azamina ROLAD you're playing, it's definitely going to be one of the best picks in my opinion. I would probably put this like at the very top of strong pick. My issue with like the Azamina ROLAD deck, it's a deck that needs to play the engine requirements of both the Diabellstar engine, which there are a few of them like Hollowed Azamina, and of course in the ROLAD engine, cards like Mind Shuffle are not necessarily great to draw. The Ritual Spell alone is not necessarily great to draw. There are a couple cards you don't necessarily want to see when playing this deck. All that being said, though, this is a deck with this incredibly high ceiling and a very high floor as well. Like, if you do get hand trapped a bunch of times, just doing like normal ROLAD stuff is going to be enough to win in some cases as well. So I think that for the event overall, Azamina ROLAD is definitely one of the better picks that we have out there. I don't think it's a deck that's like the absolute best. Next, we got the branded ROLAD deck. And this one differs a little bit from the Azamina version because I think this version plays a little bit more like low to the ground, more mid-rangey. It tries to take advantage of the Albaz engine. So I will say like the ceiling of this deck is a lot lower than Azamina ROLAD. It's not able to do like the crazy Protect Code combo stuff. But I think the Fallen of White engine is still incredibly strong. If you are play like a more grindy style of Yu-Gi-Oh, I think the ROLAD deck is probably the best deck that we have in the game right now at doing that. It's pretty much able to outgrind any deck out there. And when you include the branded stuff as well, it makes the deck a lot stronger at doing that too. I think it's equally as valid as like the Azamina ROLAD build. Personally, I'd rank Azamina ROLAD a little bit higher than branded ROLAD for this event specifically, but I think that both would be pretty strong choices. Now, pure ROLAD on the other hand, I think that this deck is not very good. Like, just ROLAD alone is probably not going to be enough to consistently win games because the ceiling of the deck is just way too low if you don't add anything else onto it. You can put like hand traps and stuff, but I still think like it's end board. Unless you play very specific matchups that don't have outs to the ritual monsters, it's probably going to struggle a lot into those decks that just have a lot of gas. And so I think that if you're playing like ROLAD, you definitely shouldn't be playing the pure version. You probably want to be picking either Azamina or branded. Alright, so the next deck I want to talk about is gonna be Kewl Tune. There's no doubt in my mind that both variants of Kewl Tune are definitely favorites to win the event. And by both variants, I mean one without Purge and one with Purge. I personally think it's worth splitting these two up because I do think the version with Purge does play a little bit differently than the version without. That being because if you are choosing to play Purge, you're mainly focusing on a route of fully stopping your opponent. So that means their hand trap choices are going to be mainly like the negation based hand traps. So you'll be playing, of course, copies of Purge. You may also be playing cards like Bell, which technically can negate cards and prevent it from resolving, as opposed to other hand traps that maybe don't necessarily stop your opponent from playing. Whereas with like the Kewl Tune deck without Purge, this version is a little bit more flexible. They're able to mix some board breakers sometimes, like Fallen the Virtuous or Super Poly. They're not necessarily forced to play a version of Kewl Tune where every hand trap is aimed to like try to outright stop your opponent. Now, the reason why I think that the Purge version has to do that is because if you do play Purge, you're locked out of a decent portion of the Kewl Tune deck, especially cards like Rico, for example, come to mind. If you aren't able to fully stop your opponent and your opponent builds a half ward, it's going to be almost impossible, I think, in my opinion, for the Kewl Tune deck to really push through any half ward without access to a significant part of its deck. So again, I do think that the Purge version does need to really focus on building its deck to fully stop the opponent from playing. But in my opinion, no matter what version of Kewl Tune is being played, I think that it's going to be one of the favorites to win the event just because of its versatility, both going first and going second. I don't think there's too much more to talk about when it comes to Kewl Tune. Now we got the Power Patron variants. The first one is going to be like pure Power Patron, so you're not splashing any supplementary engines like Artmage. And I do think that these two decks play actually like noticeably differently. In my opinion, I think the pure version is mostly going to be focused on like straight up like floodgating your opponent out. It's like these are the builds that are going to be playing cards like the Amorphages, so Goliath, Sloth, the combo with like Spell Canceller. I do think that, of course, if this deck is able to go first to set all that up, it's going to be any deck out there. But my issue I had when I personally played like the pure version was that it was like very weak into common hand traps, like especially a card like Fua. It didn't really have that many great counter options other than just like full sending it and hoping your opponent isn't able to draw enough cards in like their 10 card or 15 card hand to actually out your end board floodgate lock. So in my opinion, I don't think that this deck is like terrible by any means, but I would say I would classify it more as a dark horse. It may be able to sneak into top 32, but I think because of its because it has such a big weakness to a common card like Fua, I think it'll really struggle to go much further than that. I guess one additional benefit I will mention with the pure version is that it is able to play the dominance cards, so like cards like Impulse. It's also one of the few decks that's able to take full advantage of the almost like the entire dominance suite, so they can play cards like Songs of the Dominators, Impulse, and Spark, pair that with like Imperm, and those are some of the best hand traps that we have in the game at the moment. So that's one reason to choose pure Power Patron over something else. I personally think that the Artmage version of Power Patron is going to be a little bit better. Speaking from my personal experience playing both versions of the deck, I think the Artmage version just plays so much better into those common hand traps. Whether you get Peruliad, whether you get Fuwood, even if sometimes when you get Drolled, you're able to set up maybe half to 2/3 of your entire board without really having to play into those cards super hard. I think the Artmage version does give a little bit more flexibility in how you want to make your plays. You don't necessarily have to go and like FTK your opponent every time with like your full end board. You can build like a really solid half board with just the Artmage cards if you get Fuwood, for example. If you get hit with Perulia, you can pivot more to the Power Patron side of the deck. And so I think that this version is a little bit better than the pure version of Power Patron. A concession you have to make when playing the Artmage version, though, is there are a couple of Artmage cards you don't necessarily want to draw when playing it, so there's a few more like bad draws in the deck. But ultimately, I think that the ability you have to play around those common hand traps granted to you by the Artmage version just makes it a better choice than the pure version, in my opinion. I think that it's going to be a very strong pick. The Artmage cards, of course, like I said, help when going first, playing around those common hand traps. And going second, I personally still think that Power Patron is one of the best engines that we have at the moment in just breaking boards with engine alone. Next up, we got Fairy Tail. I think Fairy Tail has really fallen off lately, but it has gone a few top 32s, top 64s at like the major events. I think that's probably the highest I'd ever imagined Fairy Tail going. I'd say it's like a fairly solid dark horse deck. The cards are still very incredibly strong. It's not like the cards are bad anymore. I just don't think that its engine is nearly as strong as some of the other decks that we have up here. Fairy Tail is one of the best users of a card like Super Poly, which is a huge benefit for it because Super Poly is incredibly good in this format. Its end board can just flood the opponent out if they are playing a card like a Secret Village of Spellcasters. Some decks just don't have an out to that. It has weaknesses to like common hand traps like Droll and Fua as well, which can be really difficult for the deck to deal with. And of course, going second, I would say its engine is not nearly as strong as, for example, like Power Patron or Kewl Tune. Just in terms of like raw breaking boards with engine alone. So for all those reasons, I would say that Fairy Tail, probably the definition of a dark horse deck. It's not a terrible deck by any means, and it has the potential to win, but I think that it's unlikely for it to do well at the super well at the event, in my opinion. Next up, we got DoomZ. I think that DoomZ is also going to be a very solid dark horse deck. DoomZ is one of those decks that is able to play around like common hand traps like Droll, Fua, Perulia fairly well. Its half ward is very easily accessible. All it is basically just a Drastia and then maybe a copy of the DoomZ Destruction Trap. But against a lot of decks, that can almost be enough to like win the game on its own. But in my opinion, one of the biggest issues I have with DoomZ is that it's not able to play the highest count of non-engine in its deck. I think the most like you could reasonably fit into a 40 card deck in the pure version is going to be around 12, which I think is on the lower end of what I consider to be like a good amount for a competitive deck. The engine is not bad at going second by any means, but I think that it can struggle to push against some of those decks like Azamina ROLAD or Kewl Tune that just sets up such a layered end board that I feel like if you're not able to like interact with your opponent at all during their first turn, it's going to be a very uphill battle for you. Now, that being said, though, DoomZ is not a bad deck by any means. I definitely wouldn't be surprised if it sees a few tops here or there, just because of the power of a card like Drastia and DoomZ Destruction. But ultimately, I don't think it's one of the best choices for this. Next up, we got Elfnote. I think that Elfnote does have a couple of issues. I personally think that its engine is not very good at going second because all their guys that they're summoning are ignition effects, so they're very easy to remove off the board before they're able to do anything. But on the other hand, I also think that Elfnote is one of those decks that is able to play through a fairly high count of non-engine very well when going first. Like has ways around Perulia, Fua, Droll. Like the best players are able to still build a very solid board under those cards. And so I think that the Elfnote, how well Elfnote does is actually going to come down more to how good the players that are playing it are. If there's a super talented player playing Elfnote, I definitely would say like it's be a strong pick for the format still. This deck is almost is super unfair when going first. They can do stuff like Hyper Librarian going first. They can Omega hand loop your opponent. So you can really punish those decks that aren't playing high counts of hand traps. But ultimately, I think that I don't really know if I can put it any higher than strong pick. Than like towards the lower end of strong pick in my opinion. I think it just has such an issue when going second, especially even into like half forward sometimes, that I feel like unless the Elfnote player is able to, like, let's say force your opponent onto a very bad board or just completely stop your opponent from playing with like a bunch of hand traps, it is going to be a struggle for this deck to do too much when going second. So for all those reasons, I probably put it near the bottom of strong pick. Definitely wouldn't be surprised to see this deck do well, but I think that this deck is probably worse than all the decks above it. Next up, we got Maliss. I also think Maliss falls into the Dark Horse category. I don't think that Maliss cards are bad by any means, but it just feels like the power level of this deck is a little bit lower than like all the decks above it. Its end board is not terrible by any means, like a couple of banishes, like Allied Code being able to negate, backed up with a bunch of hand traps. I don't think this is a bad end board by any means. It's definitely good enough to win against the best decks. But I think that outside of the fact that Maliss can take advantage of the best hand traps like Dominus Impulse or Dominus Spark, I don't really know if Maliss has anything else going for it. If you are looking to play like a mid-range to like heavy combo deck, I just think that any of the decks above it will probably just do what Maliss does, but like a little bit better with a stronger engine. So while I do think that Maliss has a couple things going for it, like the fact that it is able to play the very high count of non-engine, is able to play some of the best non-engine in the game, I ultimately think that its engine is just not nearly as strong as some of the other decks above it, so I wouldn't be surprised if Maliss gets like 1 top or 2 tops here or there, but I don't expect this deck to do too well at the event. Next up, we got Yummy variants. I think this could encompass a wide variety of decks, but I'm mainly going to be focusing on like the Yummy engine itself. I think that the Yummy engine is still like decent, but I just think that most of the decks that we see are just going to be able to play through the Yummy board like fairly consistently. I don't think that Yummy end board is anything too crazy. I really think that whatever version of Yummy that people choose to play, it will kind of need to be carried by whatever supplementary engine is playing, whether that be like, I don't know, Fiendsmith, Mitsu, maybe a pile with the ROLAD stuff. So overall, I think that like any Yummy variant is probably just going to be like a Dark Horse deck. Next up, we got like the pure Mitsu deck. I think that it's kind of crazy to say, but I actually think that Mitsu is still one of the top 10 decks that we have in the format. It actually did do fairly well at like the European National Championships to get second. It sees quite a few tops here and there. I think that this deck is actually still a very underrated sleeper pick. I'd put it near the bottom of strong pick, around where like I'd put Elfnote. Even though the pure Mitsu deck is very simple, sometimes that simplicity is enough to win games on its own. Like if the Mitsu player going first is able to set up their full end board, it's gonna be something like IP, Futsu, plus like a bunch of back row like Prayers and Great Purification. That plus Murakuma setup, I think that honestly is enough to win games against most matchups. Not to mention, similar to Maliss, it's able to take advantage of the Dominus cards as well. So you can play cards like Purge, you can play cards like Impulse. It can also play like almost any non-engine that we have in the game right now. It can play it can play cards like Harmonia as well, because they don't really care about their extra deck. They can play cards like Super Poly because again they have so much space in their extra deck. I think that the pure Mitsu deck is actually pretty underrated. And on top of all that, it also plays through the most common hand traps outside of Droll, like Fua, Perulia. It also plays around super high impact hand traps like Fua, Perulia very well. No matter which one they get hit with, they probably only need to give a single draw on her to get close to their full end board. I will say its biggest weakness is probably that sometimes its end board just isn't going to be enough when your opponent is able to stop some of your cards from resolving. Like just a single Murakumo may not be enough against like some decks. Not to mention a card like Droll also very rampant in this format, and that's probably the biggest weakness that this deck has. Outside of that, I definitely think that pure Mitsu is one of the sleeper picks that we have going into this event, and I think that because of its strong matchup into common non-engine, and the fact that it just doesn't really have too many bad matchups, I feel like the pure Mitsu deck is actually going to be a very underrated pick. Next up, we got Blitzclique. I think that this deck is not very good in the advanced format. I just don't think the power level of this deck is high enough to compete with like some of the best decks above it. I just don't really think that even with the Raziel cards, I don't think that this deck is gonna consistently set up boards that can't be beat by like any of the decks that we just talked about. And I think that even though yes, it does have that super high rolly combo of Whisker plus Crackle, I don't know if just relying on that one high roll combo is going to be enough. is going to be enough for this deck to do well. So in my opinion, I don't think that the Blitzclique deck is going to see much representation, if at all, in the top cut of Montreal. Personally, I wouldn't choose to play this deck if I were to go to the event. Next up, we got Invoked. I would say that Invoked probably is also a very solid Dark Horse deck. Going first, Invoked is pretty much always going to be able to get to a card like Invoked Oceanus, which for those of you who don't know is basically a one-sided macrocosmos, and that can be enough to win against some decks on its own. Like for example, against KT, they're going to struggle a lot against that card. It can be pretty hard for some decks, even like some ROLAD variants, to deal with as well. Not to mention if they also do have access to other floodgate monsters like Kaliga. And so in terms of the end board, I think that Invoke does set up a very strong end board that's going to be very difficult for a lot of decks to deal with, just because a card like Oceanus is actually pretty hard to out. So I don't think that Invoked has any issues with his end board not being good enough to stand up against the best decks. Another thing that it has going for it, it's also one of the best users of a card like Super Pulverization as well. They basically have like infinite targets in their extra deck for any situation, and so Super Poly is pretty much always going to be live and high impact in this deck. I think that the engine of Evoke is a little bit weaker than some of the other engines though, in terms of its going second potential. It is pretty linear in how it plays and doesn't really have much outplay potential in terms of being able to play with just engine into a board. And so I think that anyone who understands what the Invoke deck does, it's going to be fairly easy for them to stop the Invoke deck. And that means sometimes I don't think the Invoke deck is even going to be able to get to play. But despite all that, I still think that it's not a bad deck by any means. I definitely feel like the fact that it's able to play Super Poly well and that its end board is very good into some of the best decks is going to be enough for it to see at least some representation in the top cut. Next up, we got Sky Striker. I'll say Sky Striker is probably like the very best Dark Horse deck in my opinion. Like, yes, I know it did with NAWCQ, but I'm pretty sure that was attributed more to the pilot being good as opposed to the deck actually being super broken. If we look at the representation of Sky Striker in all the other events that we've seen, like, it's very few and far between. I do think that for Sky Striker to do well, its pilot needs to be incredibly skilled with the deck, and so I think that just falls squarely in the definition of Dark Horse. Like, if the pilot is very good with the deck, and if they have a good day, I would not be surprised if Sky Striker does well. But I think that for the average player playing Sky Striker, its power level probably isn't good enough to compete with some of the best decks out there, even though it does have a very good matchup into Kewl Tune. But I still think that how well it does is ultimately going to come down to how skilled the pilot is in navigating the different matchups. Next up, we got Pure Branded. I think that Pure Branded can either go like bottom of can win tier, so like below Kewl Tune, or like very strong top of strong pick. In my opinion, I probably would put it like at the very top of strong pick. The only reason being, this is a deck that I think does come down to the pilot a little bit more than something like Kewl Tune does sometimes. Branded is not necessarily a deck that just fully stops your opponent from being able to play the game. You are going to need to know how to use your interactions well. And so I think it does take a skilled pilot for Branded to really shine. But in the hands of a skilled pilot, I would not be surprised if Branded does very well. It has a good matchup into Kewl Tune, is able to play. It's one of the best users of Super Polymerization as well. Its end board is definitely good enough to compete against the best decks out there. But again, I think my only issue is that it is one of those decks that is kind of hard to play at the highest level. You are going to need a lot of experience with the deck when you're playing over the course of so many rounds. So all of that is to say is, I definitely think Branded is a good deck. It definitely is one of the favorites to win the event in my opinion. But I will say it does kind of have an asterisk on it where, like, yes, it has the potential to do very well. And hey, it may even be a better choice than Kewl Tune, but it is going to come down more to the pilot compared to, let's say, a deck like Kewl Tune. For those reasons, I probably put at the very top of strong pick, very bottom of can win tier. Lastly, we got Radiant Typhoon. I don't think that this deck is very good. I don't think its end board is strong enough. I think its engine is not good enough going second. I'll say Radiant Typhoon really gets to shine in a format where it's able to target like the best deck. So for example, back in the day with the deck like Dragotail, I think Radiant Typhoon had a great matchup into it. But nowadays, I don't think that there's a matchup where Radiant Typhoon really gets to shine. It plays very like a mid-rangey / control style, which I don't think is good enough to compete against some of the best decks that we have up there. So not much more to say about this deck. All right, so that's going to do it for this discussion for YCS Montreal. Let me know what you guys thought about in the comment section below. Do you agree or disagree? Do you feel like I missed any key decks? I tried to include what I felt would be like the top 10 to 15 most popular decks and all their variants. So again, if you don't see like a certain deck on here, it's because they haven't seen much representation in the top cut. I also do talk about a wider variety of decks in my best decks tier list. So again, if you don't see a specific deck, I'd highly recommend checking out that video first, because I do likely talk about that deck in that video instead. Also, if you guys found this video helpful, all I ask is that you consider subscribing to the channel. Only a very small percentage of my viewers are currently subscribed, and and I'm trying to hit 15,000 subscribers by the end of 2026. So if you've found this video useful to you and your preparation for YCS Montreal, then all I ask is that you consider subscribe. Finally, I also want to give a quick shout out to Card Trader. They're an online marketplace where you can buy and sell cards. You can check them out using my link in the description below and use code tcgsam for 5% off your entire order while helping to support the channel. So with all that being said, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.